Hello Bishes, welcome back to another speed paint draw with me video. As per usual, you can find this comic on my Instagram if you want to read the full thing. It's pretty much about the time that my grandpa passed away, but even though this comic starts off being about him, it's more so about how our dog Dash, or just dogs, pets, or our lovely little furry friends in general can help us cope and go through times of grief. So yeah, if you want to read the comic, it's on my Instagram because the topic of this video is going to be completely irrelevant to the comic. It's just more so of a background thing to just play while I talk about something more art related. So the topic of today's video is somewhat of a controversial one because I don't really think it's that controversial, but in case if some people disagree with me, then okay. But I feel like a lot of people might actually agree with me. Who knows? Surprise me in the comments below. But I wanted to talk about things that I don't really agree with that some people in animation or art tend to like or want, but I don't agree with it. And it's not just, in art and animation. This could be in film and stuff like that as well. But again, these are just my opinions and how I just kind of approach my art making process and how I choose things to inspire or influence me. So this is not something that I'm trying to say, oh, this is wrong. It's just stuff that I myself don't really agree with or prefer when it comes to me making my own decisions with my own art and choices of inspiration. So when I talk about things that artists or animators or people in film and animation tend to glorify, I'm talking about things that people might tend to say when they're critiquing your art, or things that they try to encourage you to reference at, or things that, people in your industry or field are really hyping up for some reason. Well, usually there's a good reason, but at the same time, I don't feel like we always have to agree with every single good reason just because it's a good reason. So yeah, these are just some of my personal thoughts and preferences, and I'd be curious to know some of yours. So one of the things that tend to annoy me or irritate me is how much animation is trying to push to move towards the live action direction nowadays. Like if you are working on an animated project that is CG, you might often hear things like, oh, we're trying to film this like a live action film, we're trying to board this like a live action film, or even sometimes with the rendering and animation in certain films, you might see that people are trying to move closer towards realism and making things as close to life as possible. And I think that that is great in terms of seeing how far humans can push technology and how far we can imitate reality through a fictional world. I think that concept is really interesting, but at the same time, for me as a personal, for my personal artistic interest, I'm just well, if I really wanted to do live action that badly, I would have just tried to gear my career more towards live action. Then why are we even doing animation anymore if we're just pretty much attempting to make a live action film? I feel like one of the things that was originally appealing about animation or cartoons was just because you can really exaggerate things to be far away from reality. Especially when you do 2D animation, you can pretty much do whatever and make viewers believe it without spending as much money to have a whole set and actors and, film takes over and over again. Of course, I do think that implementing live action elements and having that fuse with animation can definitely be a beautiful thing. But at the end of the day, I'm just there was a reason why I decided to choose animation over live action film. But once I started getting into animation, I felt like all of a sudden everybody was shunning animation and being oh, live action is superior, live action is the best. And I do love a good handful of live action films and shows out there. However, it just kind of confuses me as to why we are trying to be something that we're not, when animation is a specific medium, and we should try to sometimes emphasize more of the strengths of animation, which is why I appreciate things like the Spider-Verse from Sony, or animation that kind of honors animation in the film itself, but there are a lot of films out there nowadays in the animation world that are trying to purely almost be live action, which again, if that's their intent, that's great. But for me as an artist personally, I don't really have much of an interest in suddenly turning my own work to a live action universe. But who knows, maybe get back to me in like 20 years from now and I'll change my mind. So my next note kind of aligns similarly with my previous comment about live action film, except instead of just live action, I also feel like there was a strong preference of Western styled films or films that included the old American West or cowboys and stuff like that, and I think that's fine as a film genre, like that can exist on its own, but I just feel like during my times as an animation student, there was just a lot of that type of film being shown to us as a source of reference or things that we should kind of look towards when, you know, trying to think about our own films or our own storyboards. And I think it's fine to be exposed to a Western film as a source of inspiration, but I just feel like during the beginnings of my student days, that was kind of almost the only genre, with a sprinkle here and there of different types of films, but the dominating genre of film tend to be Western films. Like, honestly, I probably cannot mention how many times we had to watch No Country for Old Men, and I had to watch the same introduction scene so many times, and again, I'm sure it's a great film, but it's just not my personal thing. If anything, I kind of wished we were more exposed to international films from around the world and see how filmmakers from different countries are telling stories and their ways of telling it, because I feel like there's always different cultural reasons that kind of influence filmmaking, and that to me is a little bit more interesting than always being shown the same genre. Like, again, I don't have anything against Western films, it's just more of, oh, when you're just consistently shown the same genre over and over and over again, and there's not really as much diversity when it comes to that, so it just becomes less interesting. And I feel like later on, towards my later years of school and after I graduated, there was definitely more openness towards more diverse films, so I do feel like that this is being improved, but I'm not a student anymore, so I don't really know what's going on in the classrooms anymore. And speaking of Western films, this is another note that I somewhat, at times, disagree with, but I also do agree with it. At other times, it really depends on the situation. So if you are a storyboard artist or a comic artist or any form of a sequential artist, maybe you might understand this. But in a lot of Western storytelling, there's kind of a belief that, you know, every shot needs to have a reason to exist. Like, how is this shot moving the story forward? How is this scene moving the story forward? Like, everything has to have a purpose that is advancing the story. Like, it is go time in every next shot. But I find that in a lot of Eastern or Asian films, and maybe it's because I'm Asian, who knows, that they have more moments of silence that aren't always necessarily progressing the story, but it's more so to milk and sit in a moment. And some of you might know about this concept called Ma, which is often shown in Studio Ghibli films or from Hayao Miyazaki, where, and if you're at a garden, like let's say like it's about a girl and a boy walking through a garden or something like that, and you might just show them getting through the garden and doing what they need to do that is going to help the story move forward. But if you notice in a Studio Ghibli film, for example, you might notice that we take a moment to watch a flower blow in the wind. We might see the range of flowers. We might see the scope of this garden or something to better understand, like, what is this moment? And a part of me really likes that because I feel like I really enjoy vibes. I really enjoy seeing things that give off a certain mood and vibe, atmosphere, and I feel like showing different shots that might not necessarily always be progressing the story, but kind of giving viewers a sense of what it is like to be in this moment of the film is just really nice, because that's the point of telling a story or making a film sometimes, is you really want to immerse people into that world. world. And I get it. When you tell a story, sometimes you might only have an hour and 30 minutes to get this film done with, and you might not always have time for those flower blowing in the wind moments, but I do feel like for the moments that you can include it, and if it does help your viewers feel more peaceful, if the scene is meant to be peaceful, or any other sort of emotion that you're intending for the viewer to feel, then I think that's something that should be thought about more in film, and we don't always have to treat everything like, go time. So the next thing that I kind of disagree with, that is not so much from only the world of artists, but a lot of general audience members kind of comment on this, and movie reviewers comment on this, is when things are not original or they're too predictable, like they should be a bad thing or something like that. So I feel like in this day and age, because I guess technology is always advancing and things in life are always advancing, we think that originality should be advancing. And to some degree, like if you can make something super original that's just never been done before, amazing, that's great for you. But I also feel like I don't think every film or story has to be original, and in a way I kind of feel like originality just doesn't exist anymore, even if people think that it can still be possible. I don't know, I would like to be proven wrong, but I just personally feel like anything that can make a good story comes from somewhere, and if it comes from somewhere, there might not be originality behind that at all times. And then regarding predictability, I don't feel like just because a movie or animated film or show was predictable always means that it was bad. I only think that it really is bad is if the filmmakers or directors try to really make it seem like, oh, we're going to make this movie unpredictable, like we're going to really work so hard to make the ending a surprise. Like if they really built it up to be that way, and then in the end you still were able to predict it, yet then yeah, I could see how artists or filmmakers just missed the mark on that. But there are a lot of times where movies aren't trying to be unpredictable, but people will still comment things like, oh, that was so predictable at the end. And I sometimes feel like it's just a comment that people make just to comment, but not necessarily realize that, that wasn't even the intent of the film. So I feel like whenever we make stories, comics, animated shows, movies, or any sort of art that is telling a story, I don't think that every artist is creating things for the sake of surprising their viewers. Like, that is not the point of why we create art. We're not trying to make a thriller here. It's sometimes about just creating something to have a viewer experience what the character is going through. Like, we just want to create something to make you live through somebody else's shoes, and that does not always mean that the story is going to be a huge birthday surprise or something like that. And that goes along with originality too. Like, we're not always trying to be here to make things be so impressive that you've never seen it before. Like, no, we're just probably telling another iteration of something that already exists. Like, for example, you might have already seen Cinderella 1,000 times, but have you ever seen the Cinderella from China? Have you ever seen the Cinderella from Brazil? Have you ever seen the Cinderella from, I don't know, some other country? It's just, there's so many different ways to tell the same story, and sometimes those small nuances or those differences that you are unfamiliar with because maybe that's something you did not grow up with can actually teach you something new, despite that foundational storytelling that you might have heard 1,000 times, but you could still learn something new from it. So that was pretty much coming from a general audience member perspective, and now I'm going to move back to what people in my industry, which is art, animation, film, specifically say that I don't really agree with. And believe it or not, during my storyboard classes back in CalArts, I was actually told often that your drawing skills are not really going to matter at the end of the day when it comes to storyboarding, because your understanding of cinematography will matter more. And yeah, to some degree I agree with that, and to some degree I also disagree with that. And I totally agree in the sense that, let's say you're really good at drawing characters and designing designing characters, but whatever you draw is not even communicating the point of the story, then yeah, you really probably need to work on your cinematography skills and where you place characters or how you move the camera to really show that you understand the story and you can communicate the point of it. But I also feel like that there are times where, yeah, your drawing skills are going to matter, because sometimes your drawing skills actually depend on how well you understand depth, or how well you understand nuanced emotions, or how well you understand like human anatomy to do certain things. Because when it comes to acting, which is really pushed a lot more in storyboards now, they really want you to break down certain emotions for really big, like, emotional scenes. Like, if you haven't noticed, a lot of films out there in animation involve a lot of generational trauma, so expect a lot of complex, nuanced emotions to be coming out of those films. And to really be able to draw those types of expressions, you really do need to have a good understanding of how to draw facial expressions that connect to certain emotions. And sometimes when you're just generally good at drawing broadly, but you're not really good at drawing specifically, you might struggle with doing things that are that specific, which is why I feel like being able to draw well is still going to matter at the end of the day, because you're going to have to be able to tackle some super technical drawings with characters that are in very complicated perspectives. Or when it comes to acting, you're going to have to draw characters dealing with super complicated emotions. And sometimes it requires more than just basic drawing skills to translate that. At the end of the day, I totally understand that some of these things are supposed to be more delegated towards layout artists or animators to either define the character acting or how far in space is this object gonna be. So those I totally understand, but I also just feel like in this day and age, a lot of expectations are going to be made towards storyboard artists. And while I disagree with those expectations as well, which I already made a separate video for, it's kind of just one of those things that you just have to do in this day and age to survive as a board artist in your job. So yeah. Anyway, I hate to end it on a dark note or a bad note, but I swear that the next video won't be as negative or depressing, so I'm sorry if I, maybe discouraged someone out there, but that was not my intent. I just want to say these things so that maybe if you also felt the same way I did, you don't have to feel alone if someone told you something that you also disagree with. But yeah, that's pretty much it for today's video. Thank you for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. So peace out and stay wholesome, bitches.